Good day, everyone. This is the second part of the topic raising long term financing. You can actually notice on your screen the picture about long term finance. Now, these include other terms or other topics. However, they are worthy to mention because they might be connected to our topics. So you can see there equity bonds and term loans. Then we also have accruals, which are also liabilities. Venture capital is something that is already of an advanced scale or another topic, but we might mention that. It's worthy to mention anyway. So as what I've said, the sources of raising long-term finance or financing could be composed or could be grouped into two. We have debt and equity. So debt, we have bonds and term loans. What is good in this illustration is that there are pros and cons. Pros are the advantages and cons are the disadvantages. For bonds, the pros would be easier to raise funds by or via rather bonds. And then the bonds actually are securities, debt instruments in which the investor would enjoy fixed returns while the borrower would be getting or would be paying fixed payments. So it's not like changing depending on the market. So bonds could be also great, especially the so-called federal bonds, because investor would have confidence for such. Federal bonds would be the bonds issued by the government. So you know that if the government will be issuing bonds, so basically the government also has the liquidity just in case that, for example, it has to pay it when that is going or it is going to be nearing maturity or it is now at maturity that requires payment. So the government can basically pay out of it. You know, the government is very liquid. So that's why federal bonds would be easier to raise. Then, however, should we compare that with the prevailing interest rate or the market rate of interest, the values of the bonds would differ or would be different with the face value. Remember, for long-term obligations, we are going to compute the present value of the principal and interest. So in that case, the greater the interest rates there are, the lesser the present value factor. So the lesser the present value of the cash flow. So you know those things already. Next, for term loans, it would be easier to obtain. Normally that they could be ranging from short term to long term. In fact, even in matter of days, we can obtain term loans. However, they would require heavy collaterals if we obtain, for example, from the bank. And then normally whatever is the collateral's value or amount, the loan to be given is just a fraction of that. So not entirely its value. That's the con. For accruals, so these are the obligations that are unpaid, so expenses that are already incurred but not yet paid in our fundamentals of accounting. They incur absolutely no cost in raising such funds. However, by the way, this is in that case because the accruals are done internally. Because if this is rather external accruals, that would involve costs. So hopefully you're not confused. Just like, for example, accruals that are obtained, let's say, from our utility companies partners or service companies in which we obtain services. So in that case, for sure, there would be costs for the accruals. But internal, absolutely no cost. The con would be a source of conflict since the shareholders may prefer dividend rather than a plowback. So what we mean by that, a plowback? This means that whatever the profits there are for the corporation, they would be invested again so that they would earn, earn, and earn. That's rollback. However, that would be a cause of conflict because some of the shareholders, if not all, may prefer that such profits should be issued as dividends rather than a reinvestment. We can treat as a plowback, a reinvestment of the supposedly dividends. All right, so those are for the obligations. For the equity, we have no repayment obligation arises during the lifetime of the company simply because an equity or a share or stock has no maturity date. That's the characteristic. as opposed of debt in which they have maturity dates. So they would be due for payment. But equity, they're not. For as long as you would like to earn, earn, and earn, so you can just keep your money there. Then issue of shares via an IPO. This is really a costly affair, and this would entail several legal and banking expenses. So if we are going to have an initial public offering in which we are going to discuss more later on, that is the first time that we issue our shares to the public, that's going to be costly. And we have to spend, of course, for legal, banking, transaction costs. Okay, what about venture capital? So example, if there is an opportunity for a company to enter into a so-called joint venture wherein there's another company or corporation that will be acting as a partner, or they will be acting as shareholders of another corporation. In that case, because it is an equity, there's no repayment obligation because what we have there is an equity interest in the joint venture. So for as long as, let's say, we are continuing the operations of the joint venture, so no repayment obligation until the firm is profitable. So we will be getting, of course, the dividends, but no repayment obligation. However, when the undertaking is done, so the venture is to be liquidated, but that's going to be long term. Then firm ends up losing a significant piece of the ownership pie to such VCs. Yeah, that's true because it's possible that our shares will be issued to the venture or joint venture. So the joint venture investors or shareholders will become part of our corporation or the venturers. We call them the venturers in the joint venture. So whoever will be the shareholders of the joint venture, if for example, the respective venturers, in order to have investment in the corporation, issued shares. So in that case, those will become investors or shareholders of such members or venturers. All right, so those are just some examples. Anyway, to continue, so we have the slides here. The US initial public offering market, as US, of course, IPO, is larger than the rest of the world's combined. So in fact, it's accounting for 30 to 45% of all newly or new equity raised each year. However, again, as what I've mentioned, I think I mentioned that on the last part of the first part of this series, that the United States trailed both Britain and China in the value of IPOs. So the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ, which is also a big market, now compete for IPOs. So what do you mean by NASDAQ? NASDAQ is actually also, just like New York Stock Exchange, an exchange market. As to its meaning, it's not clear because it's just coming like from other countries in Europe. So that's why it's not like New York Stock Exchange we're in. It's really there, the term New York Stock Exchange, NYSE. Then IPO market is highly cyclical. Biggest IPO boom ever between 1991 and March 2000. Cyclical meaning there would be ups and downs, so there would be patterns observed that it's at its low, lowest low, then the highest high, and then later on it would be going to the low and high and so on. So there's a pattern or cycle. Then market is prone to industry fads, meaning the trends. So when there were semiconductors, biotech, mid 1980s, so that also observed or that made some fluctuations in the market, most especially with the increases or higher returns, and then also the internet after 1995. So you can see here the periods, the number of offerings, the average first day of returns, and the gross proceeds in millions of dollars. So it's really like very big if we are going to look from 1975 to 2006. So of course, that's a total of 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so by 2000 and 2006 here, it's really at its peak or highest. And then in terms of, for example, the average first day of returns. But then for the number of offerings, we have here from 1990 to 99, and gross proceeds we have in 1980 to 89. So you can see that here, okay? Then initial returns were very high during internet boom, which accounted for, I will minimize for a while, which was 69.0% in 1999, and then 55.5% in 2000. So this is the reason, or this is the point where we would be seeing the very big percentages for the average first day returns in 1999, which is within this particular range or bracket of period, and then in 2000 also. So the initial returns because of internet boom were accounted and were accountable in terms of the highest percentages of average first day of returns from these two groups. All right, advantages of IPOs. In terms of raising the large amounts of new capital, so we have it there. Then publicly traded stocks serve as currency for acquisitions. So in terms of acquiring a certain corporation, then we can make use of the stocks or shares to the owners. Then the listed stock, of course, if we issue our respective shares for the first time, called IPOs, initial public offerings, we need to be listed to the Securities and Exchange Commissions, and there are requirements, licenses to be obtained prior to the allowance or to the permission to be able to do IPO. And because of the listing, this can attract top managers. Then entrepreneurs enjoy personal wealth and liquidity because of the monies going into the corporations and then later on to them, personally speaking, for the entrepreneurs or businessmen or business owners. Then IPOs also serve as advertising for firms and their products or services. Take note, this is the first time. So there could be like interest about, what is this firm all about? Or what are they offering? Is there a potential for this firm? Something like that. What are the disadvantages? As what we've said, for a lot of occasions, there are high financial costs involved. We are not guaranteed of the success. Example of the cash expenses value would approach to $1 million. Then for us to be able to plan and execute IPO, we need to pay cost for managerial or the managerial cost. Then we have to focus on how much it would be the price that would maximize the wealth on the part of the issuers and also on the part of their clients and deal with shareholders. Then in public firms, there could be some constraints or there could be some issues which are placed on managerial discretion. So discretion is option on the part of the managers. So do we have to disclose operating and sensitive data publicly? Normally we'll have issues about that because again, information is a scarce resource that can make or break a business. Then we must follow public company governance rules set by SEC. We cannot just like release any information that we would like to provide. Then here are some specialized IPOs. Equity carve out. Parent sells minority stake in subsidiary to public through IPO. Actually, for this one, this is like IFRS 3 business combinations. This is a standard and this is a topic wherein a certain corporation acquires another corporation in the form of its shares, but that is like, let's say, just a minority stake. It's not going to be more than 51% or at least equal to 51%. So it's a minority. So less than 51%, meaning 50% or less, that's a minority stake. So we are going to sell that to the IPO. In that case, that would raise cash for parent, allows better monitoring of the subsidiary because it's now being turned over to other shareholders or interested investors. Spin-off. So parent distributes all of a subsidiary stock to shareholders. Well, a subsidiary here, it's not mentioned anymore, a minority stake. So we now obtained 51% up to 100% of a certain corporation's stocks. And then we distribute that to, let's say, our existing shareholders. In that case, this would create independent new company if it is a full spin-off. A reverse leverage buyout, company goes public again after the LBO. So successful LBOs create value, so high returns to second IPO. Leverage buyout, if, for example, let's say we want to buy a certain corporation and we do the leverage, or we do the leveraging, which means that we are not working anymore, but we are earning something out of that. Tracking stock rather. Tracking stock, which means stock mirrors performance of a division, but not legally or operationally separate from parent. So by investing, we would be able to track the performances of a certain division or a component of a corporation, but then legally speaking or operational speaking, such division is not independent from the parent. Okay, so those are the specialized IPOs. Next, investment performance of IPOs. So these are the patterns observed. In terms of price, so we have IPO underpricing in US. The share prices rise on average 15% above the offer price in the first day of trading. Well, that's an observation. Great observation. We cannot do about it because like that's it. That's how they observed. But the question is why perhaps? Because the more that certain persons would be interested in buying shares, remember the lesser available shares there are in the market. So love, demand and supply, or supply and demand, lesser supply in the market, more demand, that would increase the price. Large IPOs typically underpriced less than smaller offerings. Of course, because there are multiple shares available, so the prices would go lower. Early research on long-run performance of IPOs shows IPOs underperform compared to shares of comparable sized firms. So again, law of demand and supply, the greater the supply, then the lesser the price. And new research challenges these findings. So we have here figure 11.2, the long-run performance of US IPOs and SEO, secondary equity offerings, wherein existing, again, shareholders would be selling their shares to the new ones versus matching firms that did not issue new equity. Okay, so we have here IPOs and non-issuers. So you can notice that the non-issuers are, of course, greater than the IPOs and SEOs. And the continuation. The SEOs, well, the seasoned equity offerings, on another hand, is infrequent for most US and non-US firms. So reason is that negative market reaction would be there when SEOs are announced. They convey negative info in the sense that managers may consider stock overvalued. It's seasonal, so normally the prices are greater. Then it would reveal that the cash flows will be lower than expected normally because they are overpriced or overvalued. So in that case, the cash flows hidden somewhere when we compute now the present values would be really lesser or lower. Then short-term and long-term performance of SEOs would reveal that prices fall on announcement and they would underperform over 1 year. So in the long-term and normally short-term even, the more with the long-term. What about the private placements in US? This is a sale of a security directly to one or a group of accredited investors. In IPOs, normally the shares are available to the public. So in that case, it is prone to being obtained by a lot of people with different interests. However, for private placements, there are only certain groups of accredited investors. There would be some accreditations to be obtained before these investors can have shares or bonds. Then accredited investors in private placements are financially sophisticated, meaning to say they are very knowledgeable about the markets, they have the know-how, the knowledge, and everything all about investing. Corporations, institutional investors, wealthy individuals, pension and mutual funds, venture capitalists are among accredited investors. So in this case, the rule, well, this is again in US, allows limited trading of PP private placements among qualified institutional investors. Meaning to say again, it's not all that can have this private placement. Institutions with assets exceeding $100 million are qualified. Then what about common stock offerings that are done internationally? There are two types of stock offerings. We have domestic and another one, which is this slide, international or cross-border. And there would be issues, of course. The total number of non-US IPOs exceeds US total, but total value except privatizations usually much smaller. Okay, so the total value of international common stock offerings are much smaller. If we now exclude the privatizations. Okay, so all markets show significant IPO underpricing. So the price normally are lower with much supply in the market. Then most markets show poor long-term returns for IPOs and the more with the seasoned equity offerings. What about ADRs, American Depositary Receipts? These are dollar-denominated claims issued by US banks. Then this would mean that the owners of the shares of a foreign company stock is held on deposit in the issuing firm's home country. So basically, if, for example, I am a Filipino, I'm living in the Philippines, I'm interested with ADR, so I can own the shares there from US through this vehicle or financial vehicle, the American Depositary Receipts. Sponsored ADR and unsponsored. Sponsored would be the issuing foreign company pays all legal and financial costs of creating and trading the security. This is for the sponsored. While the unsponsored is that the issuing firm is not involved with the issuance of ADRs. In which, in this case, if we compare that to sponsored, it really is much better because the issuing foreign company, example, a US company, we have to shoulder and shell out for the legal and financial costs for the creating and trading of the securities. Then here is a flow for the ADRs. So we can notice here that it's at increasing trend for our respective trading volume for the dollars. And then that's the graph, the line. While the bar, ADR trading volume in billions of shares. So shares, and then these are the shares in blue bar graphs, while the line graph, which is very erratic, I would say, is in a line graph. Then we can also notice here the years at the x-axis. On the y, we have here the respective values or amounts. So there are actually two items for the y. We can say that this is just a mixture of two graphs. Then on the left side, left scale, we have the trading volume, which is the blue. On the right side here, we have here the trading volume in billions of dollars. So you can just notice how erratic the movement is here. But the erraticity, I would say, or we would say that the condition here is just like very close in terms of moving. That's what I would like to say. So the movement from 1990 to 91 to 92, 93, and so on, you can notice that it's really moving, but it's just small. And there is a big leap, or there's a big jump from 1999 to 2000. This is the lesson of figure 11-3. Next, share issue privatizations. This is the case in which a government executing a share issue privatization, or SIP, sells or part of its ownership in a state-owned enterprise to private investors via a public share offering. So there is, for example, in this Philippines, we have the so-called government-owned and controlled corporations. So if the government, for example, has a GOCC in which it has normally 100% ownership, or let's just assume for the sake of illustrations, like a control of it because it's a controlled corporation, so more than 50%, so 51% up, and then it decided to sell all or part of that particular ownership to private investors through a public share offering. So this is what is called as share issue privatizations. For from public, it becomes private. In this case, SIPs have raised almost $1.5 trillion since 1980. So there's huge money here. And the 15 largest and 27 of the 28 largest share offerings in history are all either SIP or rights offerings by partially privatized companies. There's also a graph showing to us the years on the x-axis and the values or amounts on the y. So these are the revenues for divesting governments worldwide. The word divest is actually the opposite of invest. So invest if you place money to a certain company or corporation. Divest if we remove money out of it or that. So we have here the revenues and then the time period. So it's really moving also. It has its peak highest point at the year 2000. So privatization again is that a portion of a certain government-owned and controlled corporation or GOCC, or a public corporation owned by the government, or just part of it is being sold to a certain private company or persons or individuals through an initial public offering. Here are share issue privatizations. So these are the companies which are, for example, GOCCs before, public before, but a portion or all of it is sold to private individuals or corporations. And we can see here the method or mechanism for an offering. Is it an IPO? Is it an initial one or a seasoned equity offering? All right, so to summarize, in raising long-term financing, we can issue, of course, common and preferred stocks, or we can also issue debt. So either equity or debt, or reverse, debt or equity. Then financial intermediaries like banks can help us and institutions to raise funds by selling claims on themselves. So the banks again can help us in the underwriting process, in the managing advices, and so on. Then volume of security issues, the privatization and securitization surged eightfold in 11 years. So there's an increase of that than just by relying traditionally on the banks as our financial intermediaries. Finally, firms wanting to raise capital externally must make a series of decisions. Is it a debt or equity? Shall we use the services of an investment bank or not? So that's the end of presentation. Hopefully you learned something from this session. Thank you very much, and God bless us all. Have a good day.